All right. We'll be there in a minute. Been moving through the Synoptics in here, and Jesus now, we talked about legions. Now he's returning to Capernaum. And of course, the crowds are with him now. This is a very popular time in the ministry of Jesus. So there's a lot of people around him, a lot of crowds around him, pushing on, wanting him to do things. Wherever he goes, they seem to follow him. They seem to find him. He has recognition. It kind of, in a way, is kind of surprising that so many people recognized him, and yet he seems to go in and out of Jerusalem, and nobody seems to be able to know who he is. But of course, the crowds, his disciples, those that were associated with him. He traveled a lot, and of course, again in the boat to the other side. They gathered around him, so he stayed right by the seashore. The idea he couldn't even get in Mark, couldn't even get closer in Mark. They'd been waiting for him to come back. So it's kind of interesting that they're even waiting for him to get back. Well, he'll be back. That gives idea of his popularity. I mean, it was really something. It would have been something to have observed. But why I was saying these things, this is a synagogue official. This is Jairus. Jairus' daughter is sick. And we get this in all three Gospels. And I think maybe there's reasons for that. One thing, he's a Jew. He's a synagogue official, it says. He bowed down before him, which I think is really interesting, isn't it? We miss that sometimes. He bowed before Jesus, bowed before him, humbled himself before Jesus, and that's kind of interesting for a Jew to do that. Now, that's a big thing for a Jew, for them to do that and recognize his, either to be an authority or to be what? Or to be God, right? To be somebody who can heal his daughter. I think when sickness hits us, and especially our children, what would you not do, right? What would you not do to get well, to heal your children? You would do anything. You would do anything you could do. And I think that brings you to a place of humility. Sickness often brings us to a place of humility in our lives, doesn't it? If you've ever been sick, you're dependent on someone else, dependent on other people to take care of you. It's very humbling. It is for me. Brings a lot of humility into my life, and I think sickness does that. And I think if it's your kid or your daughter or your child, you're going to be, you will do whatever you need to try to heal your child. And I think this is the case of that. He knew Jesus could heal. He made the journey. He bowed before him. He humbled himself before him. He had something that he wanted more than maybe his pride, right? If you want to look at it that way. Pride's a great thing in our lives, right? But if we get in a situation, we'll humble ourselves. God has a way of humbling us, and we'll become humble to get things done that we want to get done. It's interesting as you look at these three different gospel accounts of this. I think that it's interesting the differences in this text. I always found it quite fascinating how different gospel writers saw it different, didn't they? And I think that's neat, and it shows credibility to Scripture. If you look at Luke, it says he fell at Jesus' feet. You see that in Luke? He fell at Jesus' feet. Matthew says he bowed down before him. Mark says he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly. Bowed. It's interesting. Matthew says bow. Why is that interesting, do you think? Matthew is predominantly, Matthew is what? He's more our Jewish writer, isn't he? Matthew's more our Jew when we talk about gospel writers. He's the Jew. Right? Luke is a Gentile, right? Mark is John Mark, right? So Matthew's our Jew. And it's interesting to me as we read Matthew's account, Matthew says he bowed before him. The idea in worship of a Jew would be to fall down, to prostrate yourself before God, or to prostrate yourself. That's what our word worship comes from, proskuneo, to prostrate yourself, to fall down before. So really in Matthew, you really don't get the idea that he's worshiping Jesus as much. You can say, well, he bowed. Well, you could bow in reverence or bow when you see someone, right? It's a little different to bow, isn't it, than to fall at the feet. To fall at the feet would be worship, more or less, in Jewish eyes. And it's interesting that Matthew doesn't really say that. And I think you see that little bit of Jewish influence maybe in this coming out. But he does that, and he says he had an only daughter. Luke tells us he has an only daughter. I think that's kind of important. Maybe not. I mean, all our children are important to us, but if you only have one child, maybe that makes it more important. I don't know, more urgent. She was dying, Luke says. You got to remember, Luke is our historian, right? Luke's our Gentile writer. Luke is writing what others have told him. Luke's recording it down. So Luke is really giving you more of that hindsight view, maybe sometimes, than what we get in Mark and Matthew. The crowds were pressing against him. It was hindering his travel. He couldn't go very fast because he was driving in Dallas at 5 o'clock on a Friday, right? Can't get nowhere. So he couldn't get where he was trying to go. And that's why it says that. That's why they bring this up. They were pressing in, and that's leading into the story that's going to be in the middle of the story, because that's what this text really does. It gives the story in the middle of a story. And they began to follow him. He went off with him. A large crowd was following him, pressing against him. Couldn't get where he needed to be. And in the midst of this is one of my very favorite stories in the whole Bible, the woman with the issue of blood. This story fascinates me. It's always fascinated me. It will always fascinate me. I think it's one of the most amazing healing texts in all of Scripture for a lot of reasons. It's just an amazing text. And it's in the middle of this story. So you got a story in the middle of a story, right? The first story is he's going to heal Jairus' daughter. But you get the idea that the crowds not only were waiting for him when he got there, but now they've multiplied. They're pressing against him. He can't go anywhere because the people are so pressing against him that he can't even go. He can't even make progress. And in this chaotic scene, can you imagine the chaos? You really got to put yourself in this story to really make this story what it is. You got to kind of put yourself in it. Have you ever been in a large crowd of people that was pressing in among you? Have you ever been in that situation? Maybe at a concert, or maybe in an amusement park, or maybe in a whatever that you've been to, that crowd was pushing in on you. And it's scary, isn't it? You ever been a little frightened when you were in that kind of crowd? I was a kid one time, a little kid. I can't remember where we were, but I just remember that I was in a crowd and I couldn't see anything. I mean, when you're a kid, you're like this tall, you know, and I couldn't see anything. And all I could see was legs, and I couldn't find my people. And it was pushing in on me, and I couldn't get up, you know. I couldn't breathe because all these tall people were around me, because everybody was taller than me. And all these tall people were around me. And it was scary. It was frightening to be in that crowd. It's frightening to be in a place where people are pushing in on you, and you can't move where you want to go because simply you can't do it. There's just too many people pushing. You're just going with the crowd. That's the situation. This crowd was just a mass of people that was going, and you couldn't even breathe. You couldn't even move. They were pressing in against him. They were wanting to touch him. They were wanting to be next to him. They were wanting to get to him. And he was the center focal point of this mob of people. And everything was pushing towards him. And if you can picture that in your mind, it really gives power to this story, right? And here's this woman with this issue of blood, a hemorrhage. 12 years, right? 12 years she's had this. And she's tried to get fixed, right? Isn't that what the story says? It says she's gone to physicians, and she had spent all that she had. She spent all her money to try to get well. And yet, she was still sick. Nobody could cure her. You know what kind of astounds me? I guess there's so many things about the story that, in my mind, that astound me about the story. And one of those things is that if you'd had a hemorrhage of blood for 12 years, now I don't know how bad this was. I don't know what it was. Nobody does. Most people think it was a womanly issue. Probably. I don't know. We don't know. Text doesn't say, right? So it's all speculation at that point. But I know one thing. When you lose blood, what happens to you? You get weak, don't you? If you had had a hemorrhage of blood for 12 years, just to get to where Jesus was, had to be a job. Wouldn't you think? I would think. And on top of that, now she can't get to him because nobody can get to him. But on top of this, she's a woman, right? We kind of know how that goes in this society, right? Jairus, the synagogue's official, Jesus was following him to his house. Jairus was a synagogue official. This woman didn't have any pull. You see the story? You see why this story is so... You see why we have a story in a story? Because this woman didn't have that. She didn't have anything. And on top of that, under Judaism, if a woman had an issue of blood, she was what? She was unclean, right? She was unclean. So she wasn't only a woman, she was an unclean woman. She was a weak woman. She was a poor woman. Everything was against her, right? Do you see this woman? Do you see how destitute this woman is? How pitiful this situation is? And you know, if you read the story where they cut the roof back and they put the paralyzed man through the roof in front of Jesus. Remember that story? It doesn't say this woman has anybody to help her. Do you see that? She doesn't have people to let her down. She doesn't have anybody to help her. She doesn't have anybody. According to the text, if you really look at the text and really kind of read between the lines, this woman is not only poor and sick and alone, she's alone, right? She's alone. Boy, are you starting to feel a little bit for this lady? I am, right? I'm beginning to feel for her. And she thinks. You know, Luke doesn't really give it justice, does he? But Mark, that's the fascinating thing about Mark's gospel, is that Mark is not the long gospel, but Mark gives us stuff that nobody else gives us. You know, that's the amazing thing about Mark. You remember the story of the rich young ruler where he comes to Jesus and he says, I've done all these things. Jesus says, sell all you have. It's only Luke. Luke is the only gospel writer that says Jesus looked at him and loved him. Nobody else says that. Luke gives us so much that nobody else gives us. And in this story is no different. It's Luke who says what? It says she came up, she touched his cloak. She thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. If I just touch it. If I only touch it, Matthew says, the fringe of his cloak. Unbelievable story. I can just see her trying to get to Jesus, to touch the bottom of his, on her hands and knees probably, right? Going between people's legs. in this crowd, and this dirt, and this dust, just to touch his cloak, just to touch his cloak. It's another amazing thing about this story to me. What I would like to ask somebody sometime, Jesus sometime, is that, everybody was touching Jesus, right? I mean, they're all crowding around him. They're all against him. They're all touching him. Am I right? And yet, when this woman touches him, he knows. And I always wondered, did everybody that touched Jesus get healed? Did everybody that touched his garment or touched his sleeve, did they all get healed? Did they all walk away from him healed? Did they all get that way? Just because they touched him? Or was it because of what? Because of the faith of this woman, right? Faith requires action. It requires doing something, and she did. And Jesus knows, doesn't he? Peter, the people are crowding and pressing in on you. How would you know? Right? And then what Peter's saying, how would you know? They're all touching you. They're all pressing in on you. But Jesus says, someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had gone out of me. Someone touched me. Right? No. He looked around and he saw the woman, and the woman was fearing and trembling, Mark says. She came trembling, fell down before him, and declared the reason why she had touched him and how she immediately had been healed. Man, this story is just so powerful, isn't it? I mean, it's not just that Jesus knows, that Jesus recognized. It wasn't her faith. She knew she was healed as soon as she touched him. That whole thing. How did she know? We know she had a hemorrhage of blood. I mean, maybe she was hemorrhaging blood right there. I don't know. But to know that immediately, it wasn't just that the hemorrhage stopped. It was that she was well. That's why she knew. Because when Jesus healed her, it was that complete, wasn't it? It was that complete. It was that immediate. She felt like her old self again. When God heals people, that's how it is, right? Except for the guy with the eyes that was blurry, and then that's another story. But except for that one, when Jesus healed someone, or when God healed someone, it was immediate. When he healed the paralytic, they leapt to their feet. They didn't have to learn to walk again. I always thought that was fascinating, right? They just leapt to their feet. It was just this amazing thing, and she felt like herself. She felt well for the first time in 12 years. She felt well, and she trembled before him because she knew who he was, right? She trembled before him. I mean, this is such a powerful story. And he says, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Take courage. Your faith has made you well. I like Matthew because she's trembling. She's trembling in front of him. He says, take courage. Right? Your faith has made you well. Go in peace, he tells her. What an amazing story. Are there any comments? Yeah. I don't know how to explain that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he had the Holy Spirit without measure, John says. So he had the ability to do it. How he knew that power went out, I don't know that. I just don't know. Apparently he knew. Apparently he felt it. Somehow he felt that when that happened. He knew what had happened. Healings like this in the Bible are where just the cloak or the garment or the handkerchief or the shadow passing over is an axe. those healings are way beyond kind of what you can kind of wrap your head around in a way. I mean, it was just simply being in the presence of that, being in the presence of that holiness, being in the presence of holiness healed them. Hard to wrap our heads around that, I think. Catholic Church made a fortune off of it, right? Selling relics because of that. Because they carried the handkerchiefs, didn't they? They threw the servant in, he touched the bones of Elisha, sprung back to life. You know, is there power in holiness? Power in, well, there was in that sense. So I can't totally explain it, Billy. I don't know. He just knew. Somehow he knew. No. Yeah, it wasn't just faith. It was faith in action, you know. She had to, she knew it could be done. But she had agency in it. She had part in it. I don't know. I just love this story for just a lot of reasons. But I love this story. But back to the main story, right? So now he's been delayed, right? And in the meantime, Jairus' daughter has died. He says, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher? Boy, how many times do we hear this in Scripture, right? 3 or 4 anyway. Right? Can't raise from the dead. You can heal the sick, but you can't raise the dead. Don't bother him anymore. Why bother him? Your daughter's dead. The synagogue official, don't be afraid any longer, only believe. While he was still speaking, came. Jesus heard them. He says, do not be afraid any longer, only believe. She will be made well. Don't be afraid. And then this is a case where Jesus only brings in this inner circle one more time. These guys, Peter, James, and John, right? The inner circle of Jesus. These guys are the ones that he takes to the Mount of Transfiguration. They see more than anybody else, are with him more than anybody else. They, for some reason, he doesn't want everybody to come in. He doesn't want everybody to see. I don't know why that is. They were wailing. They were weeping. Entering in, he says, why make commotion? The child has not died, but is asleep. And they were laughing. He took the child's father and mother and his own companions into the room. You know, it's one of those cases where, yeah, she's dead. We know she's dead. Laughing at him. Why bother the teacher? Jesus, of course, wasn't bothered by any of that. He took her by the hand, said, child, arise. Her spirit returned, Luke says. She got it, began to walk immediately. I don't know what she was sick with. I don't know what her illness was. I don't know what kind of condition she was in, but whatever it was, once Jesus healed her, once again, it was absolute. There was no more sickness. She got up, she walked, and he give her back to her family. You know, and it's a big thing, the raising from the dead. I mean, that's hard for us, maybe unbelievable to wrap our head around, but to me, in this particular point of the Bible, I don't know, the woman with the hemorrhage of blood has always been the more powerful story to me. I don't know why, it just always has. But you know, Jesus once again performs this miracle. And he gave them orders that no one should know. Yeah, I always thought that was kind of a funny thing. But of course that doesn't happen. The more you tell somebody not to tell, the more they tell, right? So, you know, word's out, right? Of course, word's already out, but word's out. So why does he do it here? And then when he goes to raise Lazarus, and Mary and Martha say exactly the same thing, right? If you would have been here, brother wouldn't have died. You know, what's wrong with us people, right? I don't know. But Jesus wept. I think he wept personally because he was just, They didn't understand. But anyway, are there any other comments for this? To heal the blind. Of all the miracles in the Bible that Jesus did, even raising from the dead, this is probably the most astonishing miracle because it's nowhere else in the Bible. In the Old Testament, there's no record in the Old Testament of anybody ever being healed from being blind. Multitudes were fed in the Old Testament. The dead were brought back to life in the Old Testament. We have those accounts. The sun went back. Nature was altered in the Old Testament. We have those accounts in the Old Testament of all those things happening. But to heal the blind is something that is unique to Jesus. And there's a reason he did it. Because he accused them of being what? What did he accuse the Jews of being? Blind. He says, you blind guides, right? The idea of seeing. Jesus uses the eye. The eye is a lamp of the body, he says in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He talks about our vision, not just to see, but to see, to look, to know, to understand, to comprehend. Vision is a big thing. 2 blind men following him. Have mercy on us. And when he entered the house, the blind man came up to him and he says, do you believe that I'm able to do this? Jesus didn't always ask this question. And it wasn't always, he said, because of faith that someone got healed. Every healing was unique. Every healing had purpose. Everything Jesus asked, there was a reason he asked it. It was a lesson. It was something for us to understand. Jesus could heal without faith. Could a dead person have faith? Can a dead person have faith? And yet he raised a dead person, didn't he? Can other place in the Bible that we see Jesus healing, it wasn't about their faith. They came to him and they were healed. He didn't maybe even talk to all of them, but every time we get in the Bible that it says that, there's a reason he asks that question. It has something to do with them or something to do with us. There's purpose behind every word that Jesus speaks. And when he asks them, he says, do you have the faith that you believe I can do this? And they said, yes, Lord. Maybe he needed to know that. Maybe he needed to know that they knew that. To bring back sight to a person would be, we read these miracles in the Bible, you and I. We've read them so long, we've become numb to how amazing they are. I can't imagine to never see. Can you? To never be able to see anything. I've never been blind. When I was a kid, I used to put a bandana around my head and try to be blind so I could see what that was like, and I didn't like it because I ran into everything, right? Our eyes are so valuable, aren't they? I think that's why God gave us 2 of them, right? Because they're so valuable to be able to see and to be able to give someone their sight back. Can you imagine the looks on their faces when they could see for the first time? Can you imagine? You know how beautiful the world is? You don't think about it, do you? Because we see it every day, don't we? But go outside and look and see how beautiful the world is. Can you imagine never being able to see that? Can somebody describe it to you? Could you describe it to somebody who's never seen anything in their life? How would you describe what it is? How would you describe to them what it looks like? How can you tell somebody green that's never seen green? Or how can you do that? Or it looks like glass that's never seen glass. How could you even describe to them, right? What things are, what it looks like. This is unbelievable. And these blind men, Jesus heals them. He touched their eyes, and their eyes were open. And the Bible doesn't tell us what they did. I can't imagine. And he says, see that no one knows about this. Once again, you should never say that. And he went, so they went out, of course, and told everybody. How could you not? How could you not tell everybody? Right? You have to tell everybody. Am I right? You know, brother, we're all diseased, and we're all damaged, and we're all blind, and we're all crippled. Every one of us in here. We are. Every one of us. So that's what we miss about these miracles. Every one of us, we're all crippled and lame. We are. We're all blind. We're all these things. Every one of us. Every one of these things we are. We're dead without Jesus, aren't we? We're dead. Right? And when Jesus Christ, when you take him and you're baptized in him and you're obedient to him, he makes you whole. He heals you completely right there. You're completely healed. Did you ever think about that? You get to go into heaven completely healed. Why don't we go tell everybody? If you was blind and you got your sight back, you'd be on Facebook in a second, wouldn't you, for the first time because you could see your phone. You'd be on Facebook and you would say, and you would tell everybody, you'd say, I can see. I was blind, but I can see. I was lame, but now I can walk. I was dead, but now I'm alive. And brethren, every one of us in here, Jesus has healed us. And why aren't we telling people? Why aren't we? It's powerful stuff. We don't think about it like we should. You know, poor old Mephibosheth. You remember Mephibosheth in the book of Samuel? When he wanted to show kindness to one of Saul's descendants, and he goes and finds old crippled Mephibosheth, right? And old crippled Mephibosheth comes in to the throne room of David, and he falls on his face before David. Of course, he can't walk. Falls on his face before David, and he says, what do you have to do with a dead dog like me? And David takes him, and he gives him back his land because he promised Saul, and he gives him back everything. And he says, you're going to eat at the king's table. Well, you know what? Lame people didn't eat at the king's table because they weren't clean. But you know, David said, you're going to eat at my table. And poor old Mephibosheth, crippled Mephibosheth, swung his crippled legs under the table of the king. And brethren, every time I read that story, I think, you know what? Rex is crippled and lame and no good, and I don't deserve it to be at the king's table. But Jesus says, you know what? Rex, you can put your crippled legs under my table. This stuff's powerful if you think about it. Because every one of us in here are going to get something we don't deserve. Because Jesus Christ healed us. Leaving it there. See you in a minute.